for that song. That's so much more appropriate than if I'd had to choose the only sea-related song or water-related song that I knew, which was one my dad used to sing to me when I was little, which was, "What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor?" It does have that great paid, "Hey, hey, and up she rises." But anyway, it's not church appropriate the way yours was, so thank you. The story I've been told is that my grandfather, as a young child or teenager, once watched a boy drown in a river and never after insisted that his own children learn to swim as soon as they could. I didn't know that when my dad took me to the local pool in Los Angeles and taught me to swim, and when he took Lila to our local pool when she was small so she could feel comfortable and competent in the water. Like the daughter in Philip Booth's poem, getting her first lesson, swimming lesson, but lesson, I learned what to do, that you needed to know something to do when things got rough or I got tired, to find that position on the water where you can lie back, to quote the poet, gently and wide, to the light year stars, lie back, and the sea will hold you. Water is such a great metaphor, and for so much. It's why we open our church year with it, each year with all of you bringing waters from your summer places of respite and work and reunion and retreat when we come back together to launch the year in September. Waters that remind us of all the different places that we come, like so many rivulets and raindrops and dewdrops and reservoirs to join into one river of life, never the same river twice, but always here to accept what it is that we have to offer and to offer what it has for us to accept. Water, this symbol of life, each of us, 60% of it by weight, each of us who can live a month or more without food, but no more than 3 days without water. Water that cleanses and refreshes. But water also storms and batters. We don't talk about that so much on Water Communion Sunday. We name more of the way that it gathers more force when it comes together, a metaphor for collective power, yes, but not the power it has to destroy. But it does have both, right? As life does, as human beings in collective, as we do. So when we were thinking about a theme for this year's canvas, the idea of safe harbor came up. Church as a safe harbor from the storms, this place that we can retreat to in the midst of a storm, to anchor for a while, and all that happens in safe harbors. And it felt right. I'm not a sailor. I don't know much about boats or harbors. But last summer, I went to visit a colleague and her husband who have a small house by the water in Gloucester, Massachusetts, or Gloucester. Gloucester is this famous harbor. It was one of the great fishing ports of the world. And though I never actually got to see Gloucester proper, my colleague and her husband live in this quiet place north of the main town. Their home is actually on this little inlet, but it's a short walk from a smaller public landing called Lane's Cove. A cove we walked to that night we were there to see sunset. Lane's Cove is this small, naturally sheltered bay. Long ago, its residents built granite walls from the stone in the local quarries across the front of the entrance to the cove. The walls, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 feet tall above the waterline, that protected the whole harbor except for this one open part between them that was maybe 10 feet in length for the boats to come safely through. I found some old public domain book about Gloucester from 1923 that someone had clearly taken from a University of California library and digitized. The author in it wrote the following about this little Lane's Cove. Lane's Cove used to be the center of an uncommonly prosperous community, as the granite breakwater and the ordered piles of stone still bear witness. The fish houses on the shore of the cove are very old, and fishermen have used them continuously from an early period in American history. The sleepy little town of today is strongly in contrast, though, to the lively village the old men still talk about when the quarries were still working, and a single grocer would keep all 5 delivery carts on the road with all the work they could jump under. The remnants of the old fish houses and shops, they were turned into small houses by the time I saw them, and there were a few remaining saunas, or what had been saunas from when the Finns came to work the quarries there. Apparently, though, Lane's Cove was home to some other necessary engagements that I feel it incumbent to name that this author also wrote about. He wrote, "It was in those good old days of Lanesville, which were a little more riotous than the present, that the village constable was attending a dance when at a preconcerted moment, someone put out the light and a couple of young men clapped the empty wooden basket over the constable's head so hard that his head burst through the bottom. In fury, he roared, 'As an officer of the law, I demand ye take it off.'" Oh, the wild days of Gloucester. So Lane's Cove is a small part of this bigger and more prosperous harbor. It turns out it was a place where people moored their boats and got groceries and handed over their fish for sale and took a sauna and also a place for dancing and a drink and playing some practical jokes on the local constable, too. It struck us, those of us thinking about this church and life together, how harbors were and are where we come home to. How a harbor is the place where sailors go after they've weathered a storm, when they need to get a mast repaired or a hull fixed. Or how they go there just at the end of a long week or day on the sea to rest. It struck us how these were and are still the places where the boats and the crews provision themselves, not to stay in the cove forever in the harbor, but to gather themselves up and to prepare for the next challenge or adventure. And how this is also where the sailors and captains would gather to share their tall tales, the funny ones, the strange ones, the scary ones. It's where people who are weathering the seas and the storms of life, as we all always must be doing, because we have no choice, where we come to gather wisdom and advice, and maybe even just the reassurance that we're not alone in what we face. Though the truth is, day to day, we are often facing the winds and the rain on our own. Harbors then are this place we come to be safe, to regroup, to restore ourselves, to prepare each week, each day, periodically, before we raise the anchor and head out through the narrow entrance between the stones to endeavor into the world outside and all that blows and all that rages and all its challenges and tides and opportunities and undertows. The church is like that. It's a bit like Lane's Cove. This church, it was a beacon for anti-slavery sentiment in the 1860s, and for civil rights in the 1960s. This church that survived the great earthquake of 1906 and 1989 and has been a place where people could gather when their own lives literally crumbled around them. This church has stood up for unpopular causes, and it continues to be a beacon for progressive thinking and necessary change. This church where people come for a warm cup of coffee to share our tales, to learn from each other a little bit more about how to slay the dragons of oppression or fascism or advocate for the end of war or climate justice or any number of things that break our hearts. This very moment, we have 10 working groups starting to gather resources and respond to the 10 issues and initiatives that this community thought were important or might be in this particular post-election chapter of our city and our nation. And all the while, through all of it, this church has been welcoming families and officiating weddings and blessing babies and initiating young people into spiritual adulthood and honoring the legacy of the lives that we have loved and lost. And yes, dancing, sometimes with the constables, singing, welcoming those who also just needed space to regroup, to get sober, to sleep and get a meal in the winter months. Tonight is our last night of this year's hosting of the winter shelter. And we are the stewards of this place. Stewardship is an old-fashioned word, like covenant, another old-fashioned word. I love these old-fashioned words. Promises of the heart, not legal contracts, right? Covenant. The promises of the heart that actually are at the heart of what changes the world, what brings us fully to serve it, not legal contracts. Stewardship, I don't know that it's a particularly fashionable world in America in the capitalist framework of understanding that we're swimming in, because stewardship actually doesn't mean ownership, right? Not in the sense of any of us having shares or a deed that we can hold up in court that claims some part of this place. Church is this thing that you and I, and there are other things like that, the natural world, that we are given to take care of for a time. Handed to us by the generations seen who we met, who gave them to us, and those long before those folks whose ghosts and spirits linger here in its walls and in its commitments. And we're just merely the caretakers of places like this. It's an incredibly sacred and gorgeous expectation. In this month, when we're going to be talking about trust, think about plowing yourself in, as people have for 175 years, just even here, to a place whose existence relies on the ancient notion of stewardship and how wildly trusting that is. Here, we love and serve something. Hopefully we serve many things like this in our lives that is about more than what it does for us. Here, you and I, we agree to surrender, not my favorite word, but it has its place. surrender to this body, to serve it, to merge like rain and dew and rivulets and rivers into the ocean that spills into this safe harbor. And right now, I don't need to tell you that this safe harbor will be vital, more so than usual, though it's always been necessary, for sure. The winds are kicking up and the rains are coming, and it's not clear how hard the earth will shake. And meanwhile, also, by the way, of course, I'm sure you've noticed provisions are getting more expensive. And we have a crew that needs to be paid a living wage, and lights and heat to turn on, and walls to keep strong. And so we'll need to give a little more than before. Even those stormy times can make us afraid and invite us to constrict. But we are the people who will get to be big in the face of the storm. This place wouldn't exist if the stewards before us hadn't realized the need to do likewise. And I should name that we have a boat that's moored in this harbor that isn't paying its rent, so we have a shortfall to cover too for any who want to make an additional gift. But we need everyone to give, and give what you can. Give so you own the sense of stewardship, so you're proud of what you give. I'll be raising my pledge. I thank you all in advance for doing what you can. Well, there's one more thing I want to say just this morning about Gloucester. Something I don't want to leave out, that just 5.5 miles south of Lanes Cove, right on the Gloucester Harbor proper, there is this place. It's originally the first Universalist church in Gloucester, and also the first Universalist church in America. The story, if you don't know it, is that the Reverend John Murray, who was a Universalist from England, who converted and was excommunicated from his home church and lost his wife too, and his 1-year-old 1 year after converting to Universalism, so abandoned his faith and thought he would come to this continent to start life over, that he had some conversion experience in the journey to the US. This man who thought that everybody was loved by God, not just the people who were like us, who thought that religion should be welcoming to all people. And so when he arrived, he found his way north along the coast to this safe harbor, and he founded this church. So there was more than one kind of safe harbor in Gloucester. You and I, we make safe harbors as much as we find them. We make them each generation by how we show up. We fortify the walls. We insist on keeping the entrance wide. We make safe harbors by welcoming the weary with tenderness and offering what rest and provisions we can share when we can. We make it by telling our stories to each other and gathering up what wisdom we can to guide us in our journeys. We rest and we sing and we dance and we stitch the tears in our sails so we can set out again to the wild seas of life, more provisioned, more restored for the run. We make our safe harbors for ourselves and everyone who needs them. The poet who wanted to prepare his child for how to survive the waters, he writes, "Remember when fear cramps your heart what I told you. Lie gently and wide to the light-year stars. Lie back and the sea will hold you." May this harbor, carved out of the broader sea and made calm by what we make of it. May it hold us all, and all who need it, as it has for the generations before us. And may our stamp upon the life we hand on when it's our turn to hand it on be that we left it whole and hearty for the battered and the weary and the seeking who came after us. And thank you all for doing your part, past, present, and future, for making it so. And I'll just put in a small hope and a chit that next year maybe we can work into our plans to install a sauna. Because I'm told some safe harbors had them. Blessings, my friends, and gratitude.